The steel door clicks shut behind you, and the sound follows you for the rest of your life. You are 23 years old. You are standing in a hallway with no windows. Somewhere behind one of these doors is a man who knows the exact date he is going to die, and it is your job to keep him alive until that date arrives. Most people will never walk this hallway. You are about to spend the next decade of your life inside it. This is what it actually feels like to be a death row prison guard. Not the movie version. Not the news version. The real one. There is no dramatic music here. No dramatic anything. Just a hallway, a set of keys heavier than they look, and hours that stretch out in a way that clocks on the outside world never quite manage. Somewhere past 100 locked doors, there's a break room with bad coffee and a radio that only plays the same 3 stations. This is where you'll eat lunch for the next 10 years. This is where you'll learn to laugh at things you'd never laugh at anywhere else, because if you don't laugh, the weight of the building starts to press down on you until it's hard to breathe. You didn't grow up dreaming of this job. Almost nobody does. You needed steady work, decent benefits, a paycheck that didn't bounce, and the state was hiring. The application took an afternoon. The training took 6 weeks. There were classroom sessions on use of force policy, on suicide watch protocols, on how to read a cell block for the small signs that something is about to go wrong. There was a walkthrough of the unit itself, guided by a supervisor who had clearly given this exact tour 100 times before and stopped feeling anything about it years ago. Nothing in those 6 weeks prepared you for the first time a condemned man asked you, calmly, what happens to a body after the chemicals stop it? You didn't have an answer. You still don't, not really. You just nodded, and kept walking your route, because the tier doesn't stop for a question like that. The tier never stops. You start here, at the bottom of the ladder, and the bottom is heavier than you expected. Rank 1 is the tier officer, and the tier is where you live now. 8 hours a day, sometimes 16 when someone calls in sick, walking the same 40 feet of concrete past the same handful of cells. You log every meal. You log every shower. You log every word exchanged through a slot in a steel door, because on this tier, paperwork is armor. If something goes wrong, the log is the only thing standing between you and a hearing. The pay is barely above minimum wage in most states. The men on the other side of the door have nothing left to lose, and you have everything to lose, and somehow you're the one wearing the uniform. Why does that math never feel fair? You learn the names fast, whether you want to or not. Not because you're friendly. Because you have to know exactly who is behind exactly which door, exactly what they're capable of, exactly what sets them off. The inmate in cell 14 hasn't spoken in 3 years. The one in cell 9 talks to you every single day, tells you about his daughter, asks if you think she still thinks about him. You are not supposed to answer that question. You answer it anyway, once, quietly, and you regret it and you don't regret it at the same time. You also learn the sounds of the building, the way a sailor learns the sounds of a ship. The particular groan the ventilation makes at 2 in the morning. The specific rhythm of footsteps that means a supervisor is coming, versus the rhythm that means a fellow officer is walking fast because something's wrong. You learn which men bang on their doors when they're anxious, and which men go completely silent, and how the silent ones are usually the ones you should be watching closest. The isolation gets to you before the danger does. 23 hours a day. Most of these men see almost no one but you and a handful of other officers. No windows in most cells. No physical contact with another human being that isn't a pair of handcuffs. You become, whether you asked for the role or not, one of the only steady human presences in another person's entire remaining life. That's not something they cover in training. That's something you carry home and don't know how to explain to your own family at dinner. Rank 2 is the escort officer, and this is where the job stops being about routine and starts being about control. You walk condemned men to the exercise yard, to the visitation room, to the medical unit, hands cuffed, chains at the waist, 2 officers minimum, sometimes 4. One wrong step and a 180-pound man in shackles becomes a threat to everyone in the corridor. You train for restraint holds you hope you never use. Most days you don't use them. Some days you do, and afterward your hands won't stop shaking even though you did everything right. The psychologist Peter Finn, who spent years studying correctional officer stress for the National Institute of Justice, found that officers in high-security units carry a specific kind of chronic hypervigilance, the body staying braced for danger long after the danger has passed. You don't need the study to know this. You feel it every time you get home and can't fall asleep because your body is still listening for a cell door. Visitation days are their own kind of strange. You escort a man who murdered someone's entire family into a room to see his mother, who still shows up every single month, who still brings photographs of grandchildren he'll never meet outside of a glass partition. You stand there, close enough to hear every word, required to say nothing, required to feel nothing on the surface even as something in your chest tightens watching an old woman hold her son's hand through a slot for exactly the amount of time the clock allows. Then the visit ends. Then you walk him back. Then you do it again next month. Do you ever get used to it? Some officers say yes. Most, if you catch them off duty and buy them a drink, will eventually admit that used to it is just a phrase people use to describe learning how to compartmentalize fast enough to survive the shift. Rank 3 is where the money finally starts to make sense. Supervisory posts, shift command, hazard pay for working the most volatile units. You've survived long enough to be trusted with more responsibility, which mostly means more decisions, which mostly means more weight. You're the one who decides whether a lockdown is necessary. You're the one who decides which new officer gets assigned to the tier where a man was executed the month before, and whether that officer is ready for what waits behind those doors. You watch rookies quit within a year. You wonder, quietly, why you stayed. You start making calls that ripple through the entire unit. When to pull an officer off a tier because they've started snapping at inmates over nothing. When a lockdown genuinely needs to happen versus when it's overkill that will only escalate tension for no reason. You sit in on incident reviews after something goes wrong, a self-harm attempt, a fight in the yard, an officer who lost their composure and crossed a line they shouldn't have crossed. You write recommendations. Sometimes you write someone's termination. You also become the person newer officers come to at 3 in the morning when a shift has shaken them. You remember being that rookie once, standing outside the break room trying to steady your breathing before anyone saw your hand shake. Now you're the one talking someone else down, telling them what nobody told you, that it doesn't get less heavy, you just get stronger arms. By now you understand something the outside world doesn't. Death row isn't loud. It isn't chaos and riots and movie violence. It's silence. It's routine stretched so thin it becomes its own kind of pressure. Men here can wait 10, 15, 20 years for a date that may never come, and you are the person who watches that waiting happen, day after day, year after year, until the waiting starts to feel like it belongs to you too. Time moves differently on this side of the wall. Out there, a decade is milestones, promotions, birthdays, a kid graduating. In here, a decade can be a single unresolved appeal, a single date that gets set and then postponed again, while the man behind the door gets older and grayer and somehow more familiar to you than half the people in your own life. Rank 4 is the execution team, and this is the top of the ladder whether anyone admits that out loud or not. Not every officer is chosen. Volunteers are rare. The ones who serve on this team are selected carefully, trained separately, and paid a small stipend that nobody would call adequate for what the job asks of them. You strap restraints. You insert 4 lines. You stand in a room with curtains and witnesses on the other side of the glass, and you carry out, piece by procedural piece, a death that the state has ordered and you did not choose. The rehearsals happen weeks in advance, sometimes with a volunteer standing in for the condemned man, every motion practiced until it's smooth, until it's silent, until it looks less like something happening to a human being and more like a mechanism completing its function. You are told exactly where to stand. You are told exactly what to say, if anything at all. Some states require a phone line kept open until the final moment, in case a stay of execution arrives. You have heard that phone ring at the last possible second. You have also stood in a room where it stayed silent the entire time. What does a person actually feel in that room? Officers rarely say, not fully, not even to each other. What gets said instead are small, clipped phrases. It went clean, no complications. The language of a job completed rather than a life ended. That language isn't coldness. It's survival. The criminologist Robert Johnson spent years interviewing officers who worked directly on execution teams, and what he documented again and again was this: the process is built almost entirely around ritual and procedure, because ritual is what lets human beings do something their conscience was never designed to do. Checklists, scripts, roles rehearsed until they're mechanical. Not because the officers don't feel it, because feeling it in the moment would make the moment impossible to survive. And the psychologist Michael Osofsky, who studied the psychological toll on execution team members directly, found something the state never puts in a job description. Officers develop a kind of internal splitting, a way of separating the human being they escort down the hall from the procedure they are required to carry out. It isn't coldness. It's the only mechanism available for doing the unthinkable and still going home afterward and being a parent, a spouse, a neighbor, someone at the grocery store buying milk like nothing happened 3 hours earlier. This is the peak of the hierarchy. Not a corner office. Not a title people envy. A small room with a gurney in it, and the quiet understanding that you are now part of the last hour of another human being's life, over and over, for as long as you hold this post. Here is the twist nobody tells you about going in. The cost of this job isn't measured in danger. It's measured in what accumulates in you over the years, the sleep that never quite comes back, the flashes of a face at 3 a.m, the strange guilt of being unable to explain the job to your own family because the job resists explanation. Officers on execution teams report intrusive memories at rates far higher than the general prison staff. Divorce rates climb. Drinking climbs. Some officers leave corrections entirely and never speak of this chapter again. Others stay for decades, because somebody has to, and because leaving feels like abandoning men who have almost no one else who sees them as human at all. You start noticing the toll in small ways first. A short temper with your kids that wasn't there before. A reluctance to talk about work that turns into a reluctance to talk at all. Friends outside the job stop asking what your day was like, because your answers got shorter and shorter until you stopped giving them. Some officers find their way to therapy, to peer support groups quietly run inside the department, to routines that keep the weight from settling too deep. Others don't, and the weight settles anyway, whether they invited it in or not. And underneath all of it sits a question you never fully answer, no matter how many years you put in. You didn't sentence anyone. You didn't sit on the jury. You are simply the person standing closest when the state's decision finally arrives, and somehow that proximity makes you feel responsible for something you never chose. Is that fair? Nobody in this building would tell you it is. But somebody has to stand in that room, and on any given day, in any given unit across the country, that somebody is you. You didn't choose this world to feel powerful. You chose it because it was work, and it became something you carry the rest of your life. The uniform comes off. The paycheck clears. But the hallway stays with you, the fluorescent light, the click of the steel door, the man in cell 9 asking if his daughter still thinks about him. The steel door clicks shut behind you again, except this time you're the one walking out for good, and the sound still follows you, because some doors never really close.